All right, so welcome to the Washington, D.C. tug. We've had, I feel like, a fairly good year for having to move almost everything virtual. Just a couple announcements. I've had this in here for basically the whole year, so I think next year we can finally take it out. But if you're on Twitter, make sure that you follow the DC tug. We're going to be posting information about upcoming meetings, any job postings in the DC area, usually data events that are also in the DC area, although there aren't many right now, they're all virtual, and then any other announcements. So this has been set up on the user group page. The nice thing about everybody being virtual is that you can attend any user group now across the world. So Tableau has conveniently put all of the virtual meetings onto a page, and then you can basically go to a Tableau event every night. There's just a ton of information and a ton of content out there. Shameless plug for myself, the videos for Tableau conference-ish are up. This is the session that I did, but tons of other, recordings out there, good information that you should check out. All right, so today we are focusing on user experience and design and formatting. I find that when I do a lot of my consulting work, there are a lot of people who know how to make a bar graph, or they know how to click the buttons that are needed to make a line graph. But sometimes the missing part is that design and really making it look good and just making it pop. So that's what this is all about today. So we have 3 speakers that are going to be coming up. We have Hobbs, who's going to be doing user interface and experience tips and tricks. So he has kind of like a checklist to go through, or a few main topics to think about when designing. And then we have Roshni Gohil, and she's going to be talking about usability testing, which I think is going to be really useful because I haven't really heard of many people doing this with their Tableau dashboards. And then we have Layla, who's going to be coming up at the end, who is going to be talking about filters. I'm sure a lot of us have worked in situations where our client or our end user wants every filter imaginable. So she's going to be talking a little bit about that and how you can try to avoid it and maybe make it look better. So with that, we're going to hop right in, and Hobbs is going to be first.
Hey everybody, my name is Hobbs. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. As I present today, if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, and I will to monitor that. And I probably won't answer any of the questions until I get to the end. But at the end of that time, if you've posted anything, I can read back through those. And then obviously you're welcome to unmute and ask me whatever it is you're interested in asking me. So I'm a business intelligence consultant. I work in a variety of front-end and back-end tools, including Tableau and Click and Google Looker and Power BI and other things. And I found that as I was building out reporting, that what I really needed was a checklist. I'd build something and I'd say, yeah, that looks okay, I guess. And I didn't really have any solid criteria. And when I asked people about it, there was a lot of discussion about the art versus the science of the thing. And I decided, okay, well, let's bridge that gap by making a checklist of good ideas. Here are the things, generally speaking, you should try and do anytime you build out a report. And I've given this presentation a number of times. And when I give it, what I do is the same day that I'm going to present, I pick a report at random in sort of a random tool. And then I try and rebuild it following my checklist one step at a time. So you'll get to see the beginning product and then one step at a time how that gets better. For today, the report that I picked is actually an internal report that my company was using. So I'm going to pull that up on the screen. If any of you can't see my screen, do please let me know that.
You're good.
All right. So this is a report. I've hidden sort of any of the personal information in it, but this is a report about employee utilization. As consultants, it's very important that that our time is being used in a billable as opposed to a non-billable way. So you'll see in here, there's some slicers and filters on here. We've got a date filter in the top left, and then we've got a group of employees. And then over on the right, we were able to pick a particular consultant. It was names, and I replaced them with numbers just to keep things anonymous and above the board. You've got some KPIs along the top, and then over time, how the company is doing as far as what it planned to have as billable hours, and then what actually happened. Finally, down below, you've got an individual employee on every line and sort of a tabular layout there with a number of metrics inside that. And to the right, another slicer for the project ID. You don't have to remember any of this. There won't be any kind of quiz, but simply take this in and compare it to reporting that you may have at your company. Last time I did this was for the Kansas City tug. And one of the guys posted in the chat, this looks exactly like some of my reporting. So maybe that's you. And if so, let's walk through this one step at a time. So the first consideration that I suggest you take into mind whenever you're working on a report is take the report as it exists and consider the following two common formats. This is based on the book Don't Make Me Think, which is a wonderful book about website design. And he proposes there that the human eye follows two basic patterns on most really well-designed websites, either towards the capital letter F or the capital letter Z. So either you're going to sort of read down the left-hand side of the screen and then pop up to the top and go across a line at a time. If you happen to be multitasking right now and you are on Facebook, that's kind of what that experience is. On the left, you've got the most common buttons that you use, at least with their new user interface they rolled out some number of months ago. So you've got your pages and your friends and your groups and the marketplace and whatnot. And then you're going to scan down the middle of the screen for your feed. And if something interests you, then you read left to right. So that's a common way to do things there. Another alternative that you can have is to instead do it with a capital letter Z. So there, you're going to read across the top of the screen and then basically just scan down the page until you find what you want, and you might read across the bottom as well. For those of you who are big fans of Amazon, if you're on the Amazon website, it uses more or less this approach. Along the very top is everything that you'll want. So it's going to have all of your common buttons, deals and orders and coupons and Amazon Prime Video, whatever. And then you can sort of scan down the screen to find things from there. So let's apply this. Here's our original, right? Just keep this in your mind as we go. Each of these changes will be subtle, but the end result is a pretty dramatic difference. So here's what I did. Before, some of these filters were over here on the right-hand side of the screen, and I've just moved them over so that you've got filters along the side, and then you can read across here going left to right with sort of three bunches of stuff. Is it dramatically better? No, it's not. But that's not the point. The point is not to be dramatically better. The point is to start going down your checklist and make it a little better with every step. So step one, consider the way that the eye goes across the screen. If you ever look at sort of the heat mapping that people have done with how people scan things, this is sort of the approach to take. The next thing to consider is that, in this instance at least, size matters. I'm going to use this little trick on my PowerPoint slides a number of times here. That is, I want you to read this, and when you do, what I suspect is that you don't go size matters, right? You're reading across here. And the reason you did that is because in your brain, the size mattered. You thought these things are a similar size and they're big. I should read them first, and then I should come back and find these other words which are much smaller. These are called precognitive attributes. They are things from a UI UX perspective, and that's user interface and user experience, to clarify my acronym use here. But these are things that your brain just does. You don't really have to think about it, and you don't ever have to do it intentionally. Your brain is just going to take these leaps. As soon as you know that your brain is going to do this, you as a designer can use that to your advantage. So let's look at how we can take into consideration the size of things on the screen. So what I did here is just a few small changes. I added a much bigger header than before. So coming back here, right, we asked the question, well, what am I looking at exactly? It's very difficult to read their planned hours and actual hours by week. So I went ahead, I made this bigger, and I also capitalized the whole thing to make it stand out a little bit. I did the same down here. The column headers that I had in my tabular format here were much smaller before, and I increased them a little bit. You've got just a little bit better use of size. Again, it's not a dramatic difference, but that's not the point. Let's just walk through the list. So first we did the design. Where's the eye's path going to go? Second, let's consider the size of different things in relation to other things on the screen. The next consideration on my checklist is the use of color. Now, typically, our brains read left to right, right? Color matters, but I suspect, and obviously I can't prove this, but I suspect you went color matters. And the reason you did that is because your brain suspects that color is important in this instance, and it grouped the two red things together mentally. So how can we use color in a way that makes sense for what it is when we're trying to draw people's eye to things? I have done a few things on this visual. First off, I've reduced most things to tones of gray. So why? Why would I remove the color that was present before? And again, for reference, here it is before, and here it is afterwards. Well, there's a few reasons for this. We tend to think that the use of color is meaningful, right? Looking at this example, the red means something to your brain here. So wherever possible, you want to eliminate meaningless color. What do I mean by that? Look at these KPIs along the top. Before, they were this very light shade of blue. But blue doesn't mean anything in this context. I'm not comparing blue to red or blue to green, right? It's just blue for blue's sake. So anytime that's the case, anytime you're using a color and it's not actually communicating information, you should try and remove those colors and instead go with some kind of grayscale or a gradient using a single color of your choice. So I've picked gray as my gradient, and I'm just going to have dark gray and light gray anytime I don't want the color to particularly mean anything. I've done two other small changes here, a few down here in the tabular view. So planned hours, before these values were a light green, and I have removed that green, moving it back to gray. I've added a data bar in the background that's based on this value, sort of a little spark line inside of the table to see visually how things are going. And I added some color to billable utilization because this is really starting to get to the heart behind the report. While I'm on that topic, I have a suggestion, and this is not specifically related to UI UX, but it will inform all of these decisions. And that is, when someone asks you to make a report, you should ask them what decision they're going to make. Because if they're not actually going to take any actions based on the report that you made, it's probably a waste of everyone's time. So in this case, I had worked on this project, and what they were wanting to see is who is being underutilized, right? So once I know that, okay, they have to make decisions about, do I need to contact someone's manager to say, hey, why aren't we using Bob more often in a billable way? As soon as you know that, then you can say, all right, well, that's where the color needs to be. So just added a little conditional coloring here, red, yellow, green, nothing fancy. The next thing on my checklist is to consider the distance in between different points. Again, typically you would read left to right. You would read distance matters, but because these things are far apart, you go, I think this top thing and this bottom thing are grouped together. So how can we use distance in a subtle way to make this report better? So I did a few things here. First off, I added some white space around the edges. You'll notice here that things are all the way to the edge of the field of vision for the most part, which makes things seem like they don't have a good boundary around them. So added a little white space here around these three sides. I added some additional space between my filters here. I added kind of a gap. I moved these up farther away from here, made the visuals themselves slightly smaller. And then I took this chart. This is meaningful a little bit. You can kind of see where the light gray lines go above the dark gray lines. But really, things are too physically close for this to effectively communicate information. In order to effectively communicate information, I decided to aggregate up. I went from breaking things down to individual days to breaking things down to individual year months, right? So now, with that extra bit of space between the lines, you can finally get something that's a little bit clearer and more meaningful. So again, is it dramatically better? No, but it is a subtle improvement on the step before it. The next thing that I consider usually is grouping, right? Putting things inside of a shared space makes the brain think that they are somehow connected. And I find that this one often makes an enormous difference in my reports. Once you start grouping things visually, it becomes much, much more attractive. So here's what I mean by that, right? All I've done in this context is I added a little spot at the top that's just a shape, right? This is an empty container with a background color inside of it, and another one over here on the side. Grouping these, even though they're different, right? They're different kinds of filters going on here. And this one is not really even a filter at all. Adding that grouping, that visual connection, makes things look so much crisper and cleaner. Look at the difference, right? This looks good. It's at least a little better than it was before, but it makes a dramatic difference once you start framing things in nicely with groups. Now, every time I present this, like I said, I pick something at random and kind of work through it. The last time I picked something from Tableau Public and just found one of the oldest Tableau Public files I could, took it and tried to walk it through my checklist to see if I could make it better. If I had a visual which had a lot, if I had a report that had a lot more visuals as a part of it and charts and graphs, you would have a lot more ability to group things. In this case, though, I thought, let's just make these two areas, a spot at the top to sort of visually draw your eye in, and then a spot for the slicers and filters there. The next category has to do with similarity. If you have several visuals that are the same kind, bar charts as an example, or donut charts or line graphs, whatever they might be, when you choose the same kind of visual, we tend to think that those things have something in common. The brain thinks, we're measuring something in the same way when we start looking at that. So how can we use similarity as a checkpoint in our checklist for what it is we're going to do? What I did in this case, I was thinking about this rule, right? Okay, so I want to make things similar. I took the 4 filters that I had on the page and I applied a uniform look and feel to them. Here it is before, right? With a few different ways of doing things and just providing some clear consistency here. I also retroactively used some spacing, right? And added a much clearer header, applied some of that, the size matters and all of those things. But when I got to this rule, I thought, all right, this is this place that I can really use the principle of similarity. Another good example is if you've got a series of KPIs, right? Big numbers along the top. If you've got some that you want to be considered together, right? You want someone in their analysis to group A, B, and C, make them the same kind of visual, and then switch to a slightly different kind of visual, even if it's just color-wise, right? Use a slightly different grayscale background color on the next 3 of these. And doing so will mentally help people connect. These things are similar. They belong together. I should think about them in conjunction with one another. And these things are a separate grouping of some kind. Next up on my checklist is focus. This goes back to the point I made earlier. If someone comes to you and they want a report and they can't explain what action they will take as a result of the information, it's probably not going to be super useful, and you should consider whether it needs to be done or not. There are times, honest to goodness, someone, all they need to do is monitor, right? They're going to open something and say, yep, everything looks fine, and then close it again. But that, I would argue, is a case where you should start thinking about automation. You should, instead of creating a report, build something in your backend system where you can say, I want this alert to trigger if and only if something goes very wrong or very right. And otherwise, I never want to look at this thing again. So again, focus on the action. And if that's the case, if you've got a clear action in mind that someone is going to take or a decision that they need to make, then you can come in and say, all right, well, where should the focus points be? So here I've added 3 distinct focus points. One of them is rather subtle, but it makes a difference. So in the top, you'll notice total utilization there. I've added some color to it. I picked one color that I was going to use in a few places here. And I've got the utilization highlighted because this is really what people, in this case, these project managers needed to be thinking about is, are these people being utilized? So billability is important for consultants, but sometimes they're on internal projects or they're improving things or they're doing documentation, right? Or they're helping with interviews, whatever all of these various sundry tasks might be. So they need to consider, the project managers need to consider not simply did this person make the company money, but how much of their time was literally being used to get stuff done. So adding a little focus point there helps draw the person's mind towards a particular point inside the graphic. Secondly, on my bar chart here in the middle, I added an average line. I do this to allow people to say, all right, what are my outliers? In a simple way, which months are above or below average? So you could take a particular employee, right, pull up their name, see how they trended over time and say, well, these numbers are low, but that's about average for this person, so I don't need to be concerned about it. Clearly, their manager knows about this and prefers that they work in this style, right? So just adding a little bit of focus there to what is above and below the line. And then down below, since billable utilization, money ends up winning the day most of the time in most of the companies I've been a part of, this becomes a really important number. And this allows them to clearly see who is doing well and who is doing poorly in the amount of their time that is being used in a way that can make the company money. So here it is before, and there it is afterwards. One final point that I would like to propose to you as a checklist point, and that is, there's a quotation that I heard, I think I got it from a website talking about UI and UX design. It said, most people spend most of their time on other people's websites. And this was talking about website design, right? But think about that for a second. Most of your people, most of your end users spend most of their time on other people's websites. So what that means is, for you, someone is going to come to your tool, your report, your website, whatever it might be that you're designing for. And they're going to have years of experience working with thousands of other websites. And in their brain, they're going to have suppositions about how the world works. Here's how a website should be. And one of the best examples of this that I can think of is the back arrow, right? Okay, so if you have a back arrow in your report, you're using it for navigation, right, to move between pages, whatever it might be, if you're building a website, where should the back arrow go? Almost universally, that back arrow is going to go in the top left corner of what you're building. Why? Well, there's no particular reason it should be in the top left, except that everyone spends their time in web browsers where the back arrow in Internet Explorer and Chrome and Microsoft Edge and Firefox, right, is in the top left. The only major web browser I can't speak to is Safari, but I'm pretty sure even in Safari, top left corner, that's where the back arrow is going to be. So they've got this understanding of the way that these tools work, and they're going to bring that to your tool. Don't put the back arrow in your tool in the bottom right-hand corner. That's a terrible spot for it. You're breaking the rules that people are bringing into this report. So how might we apply that in this case? In this scenario, what I did is I did drop in a back arrow, top left corner, because that's the way people are used to seeing things. I added an information button, top right corner. Again, because in my experience, that's where people are used to going if they want some extra information or they need to, find something out. The only other thing I think I did here is I added the title of the report. People are used to going someplace and being told you are here, right? When you go to Amazon.com, in the top left corner, it's going to say Amazon, right? Why is that? You've already gone to Amazon.com. Clearly, you know where you are. But this is to reinforce for someone you're in the right spot. You did the right thing. You found it. Well done. You are here. So whatever report you're working on, make sure you clearly indicate to someone you are here. Here's where you should be. And make use of icons and buttons in ways that are in line with all of the time people spend inside other tools and websites. Let me give you an example that I often use. Many of the modern BI reporting tools are designed to be interactive, but many of the report users are accustomed to non-interactive reporting. They are used to PDFs and Excel documents where what you see is what you get. And I can't tell you how many times I've explained to business users, look, this is designed to answer not just one or two business questions, but every click can be a new business question. When I click on employee 3082, the whole report updates to show you information just for employee 3082, right? When you click on June of 2019, the whole reports to just shows you June of 19. This kind of interaction allows you to answer so many more business questions than you would otherwise, but most people don't think of it. So go online, go to Google, search for the clicking hand icon, right? I don't even know what it's called, but if you type in clicky hand, I'm sure something will pop up. Set the filter to Creative Commons. So this is something that you can use freely or buy an icon pack. They're not expensive. And if you want someone to click on something, put the little clicking finger as a tiny icon next to the title. And this will visually let people know, oh, he wants me to click on this for some reason. And that little reminder is making use of all of the times people have seen advertisements and videos where that clicking hand went and clicked on a thing and it did something. So all told, this is my suggested checklist. And as proof that I think this honest to goodness works, here's what we started with. And here is where we ended. And I feel comfortable saying this is a much better report than this is. It's the exact same data. And all I did this today, right? I did it about an hour before this presentation started, is I downloaded a report and I started walking it through this checklist one item at a time. Does it have a layout that the eyes can follow easily? Am I making good use of the size of the things on the screen to be meaningful, to pass along information? Am I using color in a way where every color contains a meaning of some kind? And if it doesn't, I'm consistent in saying this is a meaningless color. It's just there for visual appeal. Am I making sure that things are properly spaced out? If I want things to be considered together, did I put them close together? If I want them to be considered separately, did I put them further apart? Am I using white space so that things aren't all clustered and cluttered up? Have I grouped things in a way that either assists an analysis or just helps the eye find where it's going on a page by breaking things up a little bit? Have I made things that I want to be considered side by side similar? Have I made them look and feel the same so that someone is not making any cognitive leaps as they jump between point A and point B? Have I considered the business question involved? What decision will be made? What action is going to be taken? And have I focused on that in the way that I have visually designed the report to make that an easy thing to find? And finally, have I made good use of people's other experiences on other reports and websites outside of the tool that I'm providing? And if you follow those steps, you will get something that is much friendlier for your end audience. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and open things up for any questions that you may have. It looks like there's a few in the chat, so I'm going to read through these. Tammy said, if you're working with maps and navigation from a story, what design would you use? I generally tend to avoid using maps unless there's a really good reason to do so. Maps can be visually very attractive, but often they're not the best at communicating accurate information. I'll be honest, I really like Ryan Sleeper. I don't know if you guys have read any of his books or have heard from him at all, but he's a Tableau guru, and he's a big advocate of just use bar charts, right? Just use bar charts for everything. And I'm on board with that. Most of the time, if you have a choice between making something on a map and making something with a bar chart, choose the bar chart unless there's a compelling reason not to. Let me give you an example of a compelling reason not to. I was working for a shipping and freight company, and they wanted to be able to visually see their shipping lanes, right, from this city to this city. Well, that's an excellent use of a map because that kind of information works so much better on a map than it does in a bar chart. But again, most of the time you'll be able to do things in bar charts. So that's my suggestion as far as what design I would use. I would try not to use the map if I can. Jean said, I personally like using Tableau, but was wondering what thoughts on Click as far as visualizations are concerned.
One more question with the navigation.
Yeah.
I was creating like a story, and with the story, it has where you can do the navigation up at the top. Do you think that is a good idea to use as well? And if so, what colors? Because right now we're going through creating a style guide or a checklist too for our design. So I really need great your suggestions.
Okay. Yeah. So as far as using the sort of the storyboarding capability of Tableau, most of the reporting I designed has not used that because that in my experience is designed to tell a very specific data story. Follow me from point A to point B to point C. And most of my end users are analysts or people who don't know what the story is. They want to find out. So I can't give you a lot of advice about stories because I don't have a lot of experience with them. Navigation wise, I don't think it makes a big difference where the navigation buttons are as long as you are consistent. And I'll go back to the website design there, right? Amazon and Facebook have their navigation buttons in two very different places. But as long as you're consistent, I think you should be fine there. Regarding color schemes, I'm a consultant, so I don't get to pick a color scheme and work with it. I work with whatever company's color scheme and branding guidelines that they have. There are a dozen really good free tools for finding and using color schemes. So if you don't have company colors or if you're building your own, I would just do some Googling. Make sure that it's colorblind friendly. There's a pretty high percentage of colorblind people in the general populace, so that's an important step. Tableau has their default color scheme has been done with that in mind, so you can use that as well.
Yeah, we are building our own color scheme. So what sites would you recommend that we can go to? And mind you, we're also working with the government, which is 508 too. So that's another big thing as well.
Okay, I don't have a particular one in mind. Typically when I want a color scheme, I just do a Google search for a color scheme creator and a dozen websites pop up. So I'm sorry, I don't have more specific guidance for you there.
Oh, no worries. That's a start. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
So Jean asked about the difference between Tableau and Click as far as visualizations are concerned. Amongst the modern reporting tools, I think Tableau has the most powerful visualization engine. It gives you the most customization and the most control and really the fine grain, right? Like here are the individual concepts that make up what could be a visualization. Now build whatever you'd like to build on top of them. So if I need something that is really specific and fine-tuned, I'm going to try and do that in Tableau. Gotina also asked about color palettes. I apologize, I don't use a particular website. Typically, I will just Google around. I do use some of the things like Tableau Public. I'll often browse through their reporting and say, ooh, I really like this. What colors did they use, right? And then you can sort of harvest the good work of other people. Feel free to steal liberally when it comes to color schemes. Brittany asked, how do you feel about vertical scrolling dashboards? I'm fine with them. For a while, and I did some website design, there was a strong impetus to try and get everything that was needed on the first page of your website without scrolling. What I found though is that with the advent of smartphones, everyone scrolls now. It's totally expected that you will have to scroll to find what you want. Again, if you're on Instagram or Facebook or Pinterest, or any of those sites, you're going to go through the infinite scrolling pattern. So I have no problem with long scrolling dashboards. The only concern there might be performance concerns if you get enough visualizations going on and it's hitting those hyper extracts that you've got that can slow things down. So in that case, you might want to break things up. Enrique says, does the native language of the user affect the scanning patterns for those whose languages are right to left, for example? That is an excellent question. I'm not aware of any research answering it. So I could give you my opinion, but please take in mind it's just my opinion. My opinion is probably yes, right? If you're reading in Arabic or Hebrew, those are languages where you're going to read left to right instead of right to left. And in those situations, you should probably update your design accordingly. I think that's all of the questions posted in the chat. Does anyone else have any last questions before we move on to the next speaker? Looks like Michael posted something. He says, one challenge I recently had is that I found that data disagrees with my data expert user's experience. The reason is because of their business rules. How do I explain to people that this is what the data looks, and that is how you defined a chart without offending the business user? Can I make a dashboard for that? So that's a great question. What do you do when what you are telling people is contrary to what they think is true? It's a difficult spot to be in and requires being careful, right? What I suppose the main thing that I would suggest here as a rule of communication is that you don't want to put someone on the defensive. You want to give them a way out. You want them to have the ability in that conversation to feel like they're right? That they're not losing face, that they're not having to stand down and give in. So as you're having that discussion with them about the data, if you're going to say, look, you're really wrong about this issue, think in advance, okay, how can I give this person a win in that conversation? Just proving it with the data is not, that would be not taking the human element into consideration, and that would be a mistake, in my opinion. At that same shipping and freight company that I mentioned, this came up. They had a KPI that they used in front of their board and in front of all of their investors that they thought was really important. And I and a data scientist got together and were working, and we pretty quickly determined that that number was actually meaningless. It had no connection with profitability at all. So that was a long and difficult discussion, and we managed to convince a manager or two, but at the end of the day, it was so well entrenched that they were not willing to reconsider that. It was a long and difficult process, but it can be done. Just make sure you're making sure that people can still feel like they're experts, that they're in control, that they're not backing down. Be as gentle as you can in that discussion without necessarily compromising what the data says. JR says, what are your thoughts on more novel advanced charts or visualizations in the context of business for the purpose of engagement? Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes your goal is to clearly communicate information. And in those scenarios, probably a bar chart is going to be one of your best possible choices. Our brains are really good. We are well designed and evolved for telling how high something is. If your ancient ancestor is running away from a saber-toothed tiger and they need to leap over a log, they can't be a half inch off, because if they're a half inch off, they're going to fall and get eaten. So your brain is really good at that, how high something is compared to something else. The size of a circle, like or a wedge in a pie chart, our brains are not good at that. We're just not designed for that kind of thing. However, sometimes that's not your goal. Sometimes your goal is to make something beautiful and engaging. And in that case, absolutely go nuts, make maps, make the starburst visualizations, right? To get people drawn in and engaged. I think that's totally fine. All right, I think I'm at the end of my time. So Brittany, I'm gonna hand things back over to you.
Yep, and we're gonna move it right along. We're gonna have Roshni up next.
Great. Hi, I hope you guys can hear me and see my screen.
Yep.
Awesome, great. So my name is Roshni Gohil, and I'm a data analyst at MIT. I work in resource development or advancement, both of which are fancy ways of saying fundraising. And I'm here to talk about usability testing Tableau dashboards and how it can help you build better products for your users. So there we go. So fundraisers are like salespeople. They have a portfolio of prospective donors like sales leads, and they have annual fundraising goals or metrics. And we were tasked with building something in Tableau to help fundraisers and their managers manage these portfolios and monitor their performance. We call it the Fundraiser Portfolio Tool, or FPT, the first of many acronyms I'm going to try not to use during this presentation. So we've had Tableau for years. And as Hobbs mentioned, people are used to websites, and they're used to printed reports or PDFs or Excel files. Tableau has been around for us for a while, but people aren't used to that interaction that we want to put into our Tableau workbooks and we need to put in order to, make them useful. So we had assumed on past projects, that filters and charts and that sort of thing would be somewhat intuitive to our users to use, but it ended up not being the case most of the time. And this is the most visible Tableau project that we've worked on. It has had, it had the widest anticipated audience, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to just build something that would sit there and not get used. We wanted to make sure we were on the right track as we built the workbook, that we were building the right product, and that's how we started doing usability testing for our Tableau dashboards. So I'm going to talk about what usability testing is, then why and how to do it, and I'll show you some before and afters so you can see the impact of conducting usability testing on actual dashboards. So what is usability testing? What I found is when data and IT folks hear usability testing for the first time, and often the second and the third, and I don't know, maybe the first 10 times, they still think of usability testing as user testing, which to them is the same as user acceptance testing or UAT. It is not. So UAT is more or less functionality testing. Does it work? Does it do all the things, or do all the switches and knobs work? Is the data right? Is it performant? Does the data refresh and load quickly, like when you filter? Do extracts refresh in an acceptable time? Does it meet the specifications? Did we build what we said we were going to build, and did we sort of build it the right way? So on these projects that we've done in the past, we learned that users weren't really digging what we had built. Features went unused, some of them were too complicated, or the projects just weren't useful to our users. They didn't help the users achieve their actual goals. So what we hadn't done was build the right product. We didn't, we asked whether it worked. We didn't ask whether it worked for our users. And usability testing is a way to make that happen, to actually ask that question in the process of building your Tableau workbook. So for the Fundraiser Portfolio Tool, or FPT, we added usability testing into our user testing to make sure that we are building the right product. So what is usability testing? So usability is about sort of three goals. It has three goals. So we want to make sure that what we build is intuitive and easy to use. If it's not easy to use, we want it to be easy to learn, because maybe the first or second time you use the workbook, you don't quite get it. You still have to think about it a little bit. But by the third time, you're like, oh yeah, that info icon, I know to go there. That has all the information I want. Score. The other part of it, is, does it help the users reach their goals? Do they actually succeed when using the tool? So we can build something to reach a goal, but can users actually use it to reach their goal? And then third, do users actually want to use it? Does it turn them off? Is it so annoying or painful to use that they'll actively avoid using it? Or is it something that's really nice, that they really like using, that they're engaged in, and that delights them, as some might say? So usability testing is something that is done all the time for websites. It's used on mobile apps, to test things like, is it easy to log in, to buy a product, to find something on the site or in the app? And it's also used with physical products. So like coffee makers, does this coffee maker have the right buttons? Are the buttons in the right place? Is the filter easy to use and replace? So back before I worked in fundraising, I I worked in the MIT libraries, and that's where I was first exposed to usability testing. So our web team, which later morphed into a user experience or UX team, tested various elements of the library's website, from search tools to subject guides, using a variety of usability methods. They did heuristic evaluations and usability testing in particular. Those were sort of the bread and butter at the point where when I worked in the libraries. And so my intro to usability testing was as a member of the testing team for one of those projects. I'd also been a testing subject when MIT was rolling out a web app for textbook and course reserve submissions. And from that perspective, from the user perspective, it sort of, I came to understand that usability testing could be a great way to build enthusiasm for a product. Or alternately, if you build something that's kind of crappy, people may already have that preconceived notion, oh no, this isn't going to work for me. I'm not going to bother using this when it goes live. So it's really important to keep that in mind when you decide whether to, what version of something to test or whether to test it all. So the first usability test I'd actually helped plan and execute from the beginning wasn't for a website. Instead, it was on the library's physical spaces. We called it Patron for a Day, or PFAD. Again, acronyms, what can I do? The intent behind the project was to help library staff empathize with our patrons or our users by walking in their shoes. So we had library staff from different parts of and levels of the organization go into library spaces and try to do things that we thought were kind of basic, like finding books, finding the restroom, as well as more complex tasks like interacting with technology in the space. So book scanners, self-checkout machines, even microform readers, because though people barely use them, anytime people did want to use them, it was a pain. So yeah, that's what microform looks like, in case you haven't ever had to use one like most people. So what we ended up discovering was a whole host of usability issues with our spaces. So things like inconsistent or non-existent signage, differences in how the same material was arranged in each library. Is our journals arranged by title, or are they arranged by a call number, for example? And while addressing those issues was sort of a multi-year undertaking, it involved lots of people, lots of different groups. One thing that was really important in that process was that we were able to ground and prioritize some of those space changes on observations of actual people in the space rather than on opinions. And that was kind of a huge piece of it that stuck in my mind. So why did I bother telling you about all of this? Well, when we were starting to build out the fundraiser portfolio tool, we had a series of focus groups with users to learn which metrics were important and just generally how do they manage their portfolios, and for managers, how do they manage their staff. So we gave them some prototype dashboards. Some of this is basic Tableau colors, and you build a dashboard, you put a few charts on there. We tried to stick to bar charts and tables, things that we thought would be easy for people to get. So we put these out there, and we got a lot of feedback. Like we had them, had users fill out a survey about the metrics they were seeing and about the dashboards themselves. But that feedback sent us back to the drawing board. We learned that dashboards, our users they're not comfortable with dashboards. They want to see one thing at a time and then move on to the next thing or go do something else. So we ended up going back to the drawing board and redesigning the entire thing with an expanded project team. And as we were discussing design ideas, we had conversation after conversation where people were spouting all sorts of opinions about how things should be laid out, what charts to use, what filters to show, what colors to use. If I could only tell you how many times and ways I tried to shut down the traffic light color scheme. Note, at least 20% of our managers have some level of color blindness. That wasn't known to us before we did testing, but knowing that after the fact, I feel vindicated. So the bottom line is we are not our users. And we needed to figure out a way to understand our users and how they actually interpreted the charts that we were showing them, how they were actually interacting with filters and all the other controls in Tableau. And we needed to use what we learned to either confirm our design choices and sort of help make that business case that, yes, this is the right way of doing this, or to revise and test in an iterative build process. And we couldn't just do surveys after building out each tab of this workbook. That just wasn't going to be a time effective or useful way of doing this. But all that I can think about during these conversations about traffic light colors is that if usability testing could help with websites, and you can apply it to something like a physical space, and you can get buy-in about signage changes, why not try it with Tableau dashboards? They are web-based, at least the ones that we put on the server, which is all of ours, really. They're interactive tools with buttons. They have filters, just like coffee makers. And, sometimes they need some navigation help, just like library spaces. And hey, look at that. That's just like a Tableau workbook. I can hear the virtual groans. So how do we do it? So the process I'm going to talk about is the same process that the Nielsen Norman Group and others use and talk about for testing websites, with a slight tweak for how things might be different for a data dashboard. So our goal, like most usability testing goals, or at least qualitative testing goals, is that we observe 5 users as they perform specific tasks in whatever it is that we're building, to find out what needs fixing. While they're performing these tasks, we ask them to think aloud as they go through the task so we can understand why they clicked on something, what they were expecting to see or what they were expecting the interaction to be, and how they're interpreting other terminology or charts or colors, anything that's on the screen. We stress as they're doing this that we're not testing the product. We're testing the product, we're not testing them. So you can do no wrong is one of those things that we say all over the place in our testing. And then we want them to be open and honest with us. You know, you can't hurt our feelings. If you're not open and honest with us, though, we're going to end up building a tool that may not meet your needs, and it may not meet the needs of all the other users of this thing. So be honest with us. You can't hurt our feelings. We're like robots. So this whole process, it starts by planning the test. And to do that, we need a script or a guide. So we'll look at a sample script over the next few slides, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit first. So we want to identify what we want to test. So there's some user-facing things like, what is the goal of the dashboard? What should the user be able to accomplish on it or with it? There's some sort of data-specific things. So what are we not sure about on this dashboard? Is there terminology? Is there, you know, are we not quite sold on the chart choice, or do we think our users might not get the chart? Are there filters that they need or that we've added that we're not sure that they'd really get much use out of? And then there's also some business policy and process stuff. Like, what do we want to learn from the users? Is there something about how this dashboard will be part of their daily process or weekly process or whatever business process we're embedding the dashboard into, or we're hoping to embed the dashboard into? And then for all the things that we want to test, we want to identify some realistic, actionable scenarios based on those goals. We may not incorporate all of the goals, but we try to incorporate as many as we can into, you know, a series of tasks. And some some tasks may incorporate multiple goals, some may only incorporate one goal. But there's a whole there's all sorts of things on the internet. Userfocus.uk has some really good articles on how to write tasks for usability testing that can be applied to data dashboards. One of the other things to think about is you don't want to just give people really hard tasks and watch them trip up. You want to give them a mix of easy, medium, and hard tasks. The easy ones give them a little bit of confidence and make them not hate your dashboard. And then the medium and hard tasks can kind of get into some of the trickier things that we're not quite sure of. And your script also needs an intro and closing, because you know you want to get the person situated and you want to close it out real nice. So we'll look at both of those in a bit as well. So you've got what it is that you're testing in your script, but you also need people. So at minimum, you need a testing team that consists of a facilitator and a note taker. In some cases, that facilitator or moderator and the note taker or observer, they're combined in one person. It's rough doing that, but it is possible. The facilitator is the one who wields the script. They, you know, ask the questions that are in the script. They ask follow-ups as needed. They try to draw out responses from people who are having trouble thinking out loud and things like that. The note taker takes notes. They don't take verbatim notes. They kind of hit the high points, you know, or the low points. You know, where did the user get stuck, or where did they not get stuck that we expected them to get stuck at? They take notes on the comments that people make about what they're seeing or expecting to see. Again, they don't have to be verbatim. Occasionally, we'll get a really good quote out of someone, but there's no need to actually do that level of note taking. We also need to test the test. Like you never put your rough draft out there with a real user. You want to go through the test once or twice with test users. So that those could be other people on the project team, or your cubicle neighbor or your virtual cubicle neighbor. And you just want to, you want to run through it to make sure the script is good, that it flows well, it covers everything, or it covers enough, and the questions make sense, and that it fits in the time, because it can be really easy to go over time. I'm going to try not to do that now. And going through the test with 1 or 2 users also helps the moderator and the note takers get familiar with the script and what we're testing so that they're better prepared for that first test that we go into. Um, and finally, and this is the most important part of this, you need real users. It's not just, oh, I'm going to pick 5 people off the street, unless the audience for your dashboard is random people on the street. You want, at least in my experience, data dashboards, you need people who care about the data and will actually be using the dashboard. While it's helpful sometimes to have, a completely novice user who will eventually be using the dashboard, or someone who is very opposed to using data in their work, that can bring some insight into some of the things, some of the guides you're going to have to put into place. If those people are not your normal users, or not representative users of your tool, you probably don't want to test with them. You want real potential users. So why five users? Back in the day, according to what I've read on the internet, usability testing used to be a big thing. It was, there was a lot of quantitative testing, so time to completion of tasks, success rates and stuff like that. And people tried to make usability a scientific study, and it can still be. But for our purposes, and this is a data person saying this, I don't care about data. I want the qualitative results, or the qualitative content. And Jacob Nielsen from the Nielsen Norman group sort of described this as discount usability engineering. By the time you hit 5 users, you will have discovered most of the biggest issues, and you're not going to ever discover all of the issues. So finding the most of the biggest issues will give you enough stuff to fix, that if you happen to have an extra 5 or 10 or 15 users to test with, you can use them to test the fixes that you made the first time around. That said, we say about 5. We tend to schedule a few more, and if we have people who are in completely different roles who will be using the dashboard in different ways, we try to have about 3 to 5 of each type of role, just to make sure that we're hitting all of the different use cases in a realistic way. So now it's time to conduct the test. You have your script, you've run through it, and you're good. So there's a couple of different ways of doing usability testing, and I'm talking all about moderated usability testing. There is an unmoderated form where you go to some website and they find random users, and the users do their thing all on the internet. No human interacts with them to ask questions or anything like that. I've never done that. I've never been a participant or a tester on that end, so I don't know anything about that. However, we have done moderated usability testing where there is a human moderator in there. So there's typical testing where you test a couple of scenarios, 2 to 4 scenarios. Usually that's about it. And you want to stick under an hour. Aim for 30 to 45 minutes, because at the end of that 45 minutes, the users tend to get a little annoyed, or they've disengaged. There's also guerrilla or hallway or intercept testing, where you focus primarily on one scenario. It could be a multi-part scenario. So, you open up a dashboard, there's a summary table at the top, and part of the process is eventually you'll get them to click from summary to detail, and maybe export the data, or link out to something else because you've put a URL action in a tooltip or something like that. So it's not just a single task, but it's a single scenario in which they would use the tool. Because it's a single scenario, it's much shorter. And again, this is a case where we've had a couple of times we had a single moderator also act as the note taker, and again, it was rough. And if you have multiple scenarios, you'll have to get more users, because each one of them will only test one scenario. So you can do moderated usability testing in person or remotely. So if it's in person, I've listed a bunch of places where you could do it. We learned very quickly that having the user use their own computer in their own space was the best way to do this, because if they have a sticky that reminds them this is the thing that I want to look at, that is helpful to them. It keeps them as comfortable, and it again mimics the real world as much as we can, because this whole testing thing is very artificial. So the more comfort we can give them by making this happen at their desk, the better off we are. You can also do it remotely, and so we've gone through 2 versions of the fundraiser portfolio tool. The first version went live about over a year ago, and almost all of the testing, all but one specific user in one round of testing, was in person. Version 2, we've been working on over the last year. And by the time we started testing, we were all remote because these times, right? So we've done all of that testing remotely through Zoom. As long as there's a screen and audio share, you're good. We don't require our users to share their video. You can see I don't ever share my video. That's just how I am, and we don't want that to be another barrier to our users. There, you have the option to record. We don't record. I believe we would have to file some sort of paperwork, like a release or something along those lines if we were to record. So we don't even bother doing that. But we also have never had a reason to, had we recorded, to go back and look at those recordings. Our turnaround time is so tight between when we finish testing and when we start looking at the findings that the recordings just would sit there never getting used. And there's also this some users might feel less comfortable talking openly if they think that this recording is going to live out there, that their manager might hear them say something that isn't what their manager thinks is happening or whatever. So like, recording isn't necessary. We don't do it. Okay, so let's take a look at the script. This is the intro. It is very long. As you can see, it is very long, but it's all important information to set the stage. I think I cribbed a lot of this from one of Stephen Krug's books about usability testing. And most of this script is the same from test to test. So we go through, we introduce what we're doing, what usability testing is. We outline how the session will go. We again ask the user to think aloud. We tell them we're testing the product, we're not testing them. And be honest and open. You can't hurt our feelings. We tell them that the tool is under development as well, because sometimes things will break, and you want that extra cover to say, this is not the final version. I swear, I promise. We also use test data, so that can get a little, like, people get a little antsy when they see these numbers that are a month or two old. They're like, I did more. I did this in the last 2 weeks. I've done this. I'm like, yes, this is test data. So it's something that we just kind of have to keep in mind. We have tried using completely test data that wasn't relevant to the user at hand in the past, but what we found there is that the user just doesn't connect to it. So trying to put themselves in the scenarios where they would actually use the tool without using their data or without using relevant data was really tough. So in a data dashboard, you want to get test data in there that is as close to real and as close to relevant to the user as you can. So again, I cribbed most of this from a Stephen Krug book. There's one chunk of this that changes from test to test, and that's the specific thing that we're testing in this instance. But again, the rest of that, everything that is not grayed out on the screen right now, we just copy and paste from one script to another. So the intro was almost all the moderator talking, but once the intro's done, it's the user's turn, and we get them talking by asking them questions about themselves. So we ask them to describe their role. We ask them to describe the last time they pulled data for their office or for their team or for their manager or whatever it is, to get them, again, back into talking about themselves, and then also talking about their interaction with data and what they do for, in their job. And then we move into the dashboard itself. So we've done quite a few of these tests, and there have been a couple times when we've skipped what I'm calling the first impressions question, and it's come back to bite us. So what we now do as a rule is the first thing that we ask the user to do is to talk out loud as they describe their first impressions of the page. What can they do on the page? What strikes you about the page? What's the page for? That helps them, again, take a breath and get situated as they read and interpret the dashboard. It puts them at ease, but it also helps us check for basic understanding of of whatever's there. It's sort of our check on visualization literacy. And that can impact how we ask all the other questions that we're going to ask. So this is the main content at the top of a dashboard that we tested, and below are some of the scenarios from that round of testing. So this round was all guerrilla testing. So each person we tested got one of these scenarios. They're named after cookies because we used cookies to lure them to the conference rooms so that they would be stuck testing with us. It worked. So what we were trying to figure out in this round of testing is, are the words that we're using on these tiles, are they words that make sense to the users and actually indicate what they're looking for? And would they get the second part? This is the interaction part. Interaction is hard for our users. So do they get that in order to see detail? Because when they open this thing up, all they see are these 6 tiles and this labeling. Do they get that they have to click on one of those tiles to see detail? And so we ask questions that get at that. So we start with, where would you go if you wanted to find blah? And then as a follow-up, we ask, based on whatever it is they found, whether it was the right thing or not, we ask, well, what does that mean to you? So we can, again, get a little bit inside their head. And then we ask them to perform a task that would involve interaction. So in this, the top row is all about prospects. So those are those prospective donors. You want to pick one of the prospects who you haven't contacted recently. Tell us about that person. Well, how do you pick one of those prospects? Well, you have to click on this to see the detail, to find out who those prospects are, and then you can tell us about it. So again, that personal connection to the data can be really helpful in usability testing. So this is the closing. So we close the testing just like we would close an interview. Do you have any questions for me? Thanks for helping. But one of the other things that we do in the closing is that we resolve any other outstanding questions that have come up during the testing. So during the testing, people are going to ask you questions about various things they're seeing, because either they're not sure or they just want to know what the future of the tool is or whatever. But the really fun part as a moderator is that you cannot answer them. You can, but you might end up leading them to something else later in the test. So you want to avoid answering those questions, but instead you might want to turn them back on the user. So, if they ask, like, what does this button do? You can respond, well, what do you think that button does? What do you expect that button to do? So you're not answering the question, but you're also getting them to talk out loud about what their expectations are, so that you can better understand what they're thinking about as they see and look and interact with the dashboard. But again, a lot of those non-answers just may remain non-answers if they're not able to answer, or if you want to clarify what they told you they thought, and sort of give them, no, you were totally off base, or yeah, you were right on for that. The closing is an opportunity to close the loop there. There are a ton of resources out there about how to do usability testing and about moderating, and asking questions, and using things like silence. And there are some links at the end of this presentation that will help with that. So we've, during this testing process, we've repeated each scenario with about 5 users, and we learn about the tool. So we learned a few things. We learned what's confusing. So what did we think was straightforward, but maybe wasn't so straightforward? Is there stuff that does the user understand what a chart means? Or, we've had comments like, there's just too much on the screen. I don't know what to look at first. This is that whole thing about focus that Hobbs was talking about. There are also questions about we've gotten questions like, oh, what's the difference between this filter and that filter? Because the labeling was close enough, but it wasn't completely clear to the user. We learn about what's hard or easy to use. I mean, sometimes something we think is going to be easy is just a total breeze to our users, and we're like, yes. But sometimes people will say, I really want to filter by this. And you're just in your mind, you're screaming, there's a filter right there. It's labeled with the word you just used. And, they just missed it. And then there's things that we learn about what the users like or don't like. So one of the things that we heard in one of our first rounds of testing, where we used or relied heavily on Tableau default color, so that bright orange, that dark blue, is, this page makes me antsy. The bright orange was too much. So we ended up toning down the saturation of that color. Another thing that we've learned in our version 2, we are allowing managers to see their team and to both at the aggregate level and the individual level. And one of the questions that we asked at one point was, you want to compare your fundraisers to see, who has more blah in this time frame. And we heard from pretty much everyone that compare is a trigger word. They don't compare fundraisers. So anytime we want to train on this option of comparing fundraisers, we've got to change the context a bit. We got to say, okay, so you're looking at fundraiser X, and you see that the trend has gone up over time. Are the other fundraisers in that region seeing that same trend, or this fundraiser's trend has gone down? Is that also happening with the other fundraisers in your region, or the other fundraisers at that level? So just rephrasing that comparison without using the word compare is huge, and it's going to be a small fix that will prevent us from turning people off from the tool when we actually go out to test or to train. And the usability testing also helps us prioritize issues. So where we're not just making these decisions about what to fix or not fix based on opinion. We're actually going to use the evidence that we've seen. These are the things that are happening a lot. These are the issues that are having a huge impact. And we're we're using our data to drive decisions about our data dashboard. You know, it's awesome. It's you know, data nerdiness to the extreme. So the other thing that usability testing lets us do, sort of a quick side note, is that it helps us build empathy, especially in the project team. So when you're observing the users work with the product and seeing the obstacles they reach and hearing the complaints and the delight, it's a great way to better understand the users. So this is that whole thing about putting yourself in the patron's shoes from when I was in the libraries. That was actually the goal of that usability test. It had nothing to do with the library spaces, except we were using the library spaces as a way to build empathy for our users. In the real world, in testing data dashboards, it's the same thing. Having developers and other project team members in the room when you hear someone say, "Oh yeah, I never use that feature. Why would I put that? Or why would you guys include that?" is a great way to be able to understand how the users are working and what we can actually do to be more user oriented. Um, and it's also a great way to build relationships with our users. For my team in particular, we don't have that many opportunities to go out and actually meet with the users. So usability testing is our way to sort of build those relationships. It's also helped us find potential evangelizers, both for the tool that we're working on and for Tableau in general, which is huge. It's not something that we would have been able to do had we not done this usability testing. So I am running short on time, so I'm going to speed through this, even though it's probably the most important part. So once you've done all your testing, you want to organize some time to look at all the results and act on them. So you want to try to get everyone in the room, everyone who was involved in the testing, all the note takers or observers, all the moderators and facilitators, and some of the project teams in the room or in the virtual room to talk about what all the issues were. You go through and review every single issue. It's really, sometimes you're like, we're pressed for time. Can we just talk about the big issues? It can be really helpful to actually go through all the issues, because something that might have seemed minor might tie in with other issues, and you might be able to think about them as a group rather than as individual issues. And once you've talked through them and you've grouped them and categorized them and looked at frequency, you also want to prioritize. Find the showstoppers, find the things that are having the highest impact, and figure out what's low effort or high effort to fix. What can we live with? What's a training issue? And then we usually do this as a separate meeting, sort of let the dust settle from the debrief, and then have a solutions meeting where we brainstorm solutions and develop action plans. So our note taking, we used Post-its the first couple times, but then we switched to Trello, and this is what one of our Trello boards look like. We tend to organize them, at least from the get-go, like they're organized by the part of the dashboard. So we've got filters, we've got details, and then we have all the stuff that's sort of the big part, the main part of the dashboard. And then this is what it looks like after we've prioritized. We've got bugs, high priority, medium priority, low, and things that we addressed in training. The training list has often turned out to be really, really long. That's just how it is. So we're going to quickly look through some examples. So this is our home tab, or what was once our home tab. And so there's like 5 tiles in the middle. 3 of them are bar charts, sort of a progress to goal type thing. And then at the top, there's a header. It's not set off by any sort of color, so it kind of blends in. And there are 3 filters. One of the filters, this fundraiser filter, applies to every tab in this dashboard. All of the other filters apply to most of the other tabs, but do not apply to this tab. But we were thinking, from the developer standpoint, we were thinking, okay, these are all sort of things that are in the context of the dashboard. So we're just going to throw them all in the header. It's going to be a consistent header throughout all of the tabs, and we're golden. We also have a left navigation. So we wanted to be more strict about navigation, I guess. We didn't want just like 11 tabs or however many tabs we had at that point across the top. We wanted to organize them for users so that they would have some guidance. And so we did that by using, I think, URL actions originally and then sheet actions later. And then again, we have these bars in the middle. So we learned a lot of things when we did our first round of testing with this. First, those filters that didn't apply to this dashboard were confusing. Shocker. And that header sort of blended in. So little things like using color and spacing to set things aside, it works. We also cleaned up the navigation on the left. We made some help content sort of front and center. And we added throughout many rounds of testing, we tried many options for info icons, different colors, different sizes, different locations. And in the end, we settled on, we're just going to use this Tableau blue and train as much as we can. in terms of I mean, all of this was sort of UXy stuff. It's all about the design. But one thing that's really specific to the data for us was the split of these, the solicitations and amount solicited tiles. So when we went into this, we were thinking, okay, everyone either has no goals in the system, which is just how things are, or they have a goal for a specific level. So your team is tasked with focusing on the under $100,000, you know, asks. This other team is in the 100K to 5 million range, and then another team focuses on 5 million plus. What we learned during our first round of testing, though, is that yes, you focus on this one area, but the managers, they want to know what's happening at above and below your level. They want to know, are you dipping down too low too much? Are you trying to reach too much? Or are you actually sticking to where our priorities, our focus is? So universally, we didn't have a single bar that we could use. We ended up needing to show all three of these bars. And that's something that, again, all the conversations that we'd had about these goals, that never really came up until we threw something in front of people and they started saying, oh, but I only count these goals. I only need to look at this, or I need to look at this primarily and see what's happening at the other levels. So that was a really helpful learning. So like Hobbs said, bar charts, they're awesome. We tried to stick to bar charts and tables as much as we could. This is one case where we didn't. We ended up using a scatter plot and it was a pain. No one got it. I'm not going to go into all of the details here, but since this was the best way to show this detail, a lot of what we learned in testing helped us train to this when it came time to actually train to it. And then I'm going to spend a couple more minutes. I hope I still have time to go through what we've done in the last 3 months. So our first version of FPT looked at a single fundraiser, and in order to look at a whole team, you would have to look one fundraiser at a time. Our version 2 adds a team option where you can see the entire team in one set of numbers, or you can see each individual within the team, but grouped by team. And the other thing that we wanted to do in this iteration was apply some of what we'd learned during testing and training the first time around. We had sized our dashboards to fit our standard user's laptop monitor. But what we learned during training and testing was that most of our users do not expand their web browser to fit the entire screen. They multitask this. So we can't actually use all of that potentially usable space. So we had to make some decisions about getting rid of either the left navigation or the filters to be able to give them something that would display right when they went to use it. So we ended up taking advantage of that magical newish feature, show hide layout containers. And so we decided we're going to hide these filters under a little icon. They're going to click it there and they're going to expand it and be all good. We also added some branding because people kept telling us we need to add branding. And so we went through this testing. We went through multiple rounds of testing. We built like 3 to 4 or updated 3 to 4 tabs in each round and tested in each round. So our first round, we tried to put that individual and aggregate team option into the same single menu. After talking to our design people and our communications team, they said, all right, you either stick to if you use an icon, make sure you use words, or just forgo the icon, go for words only. So we decided to go for words only. Sorry, all sorts of animations I forgot about. And we also wanted to give people the option to filter out certain team members so they could see a region or a subset of their team. So what we learned during the first round of testing was that nothing worked. People missed the filters. They didn't quite get the having to go back and forth to that drop down to switch between aggregate and individuals. And they completely missed that team member filter. So in version 2, we did some different things. We decoupled the aggregate and individual from the single menu into a menu and then a toggle button. So this little show toggle, it's so cute. It uses parameter actions, another new feature. And we went the opposite route with the filters. We went with an icon and words. We couldn't decide on whether filters was the right word because sometimes you're not filtering the data, you're slicing in a different way, or you're shifting, you're pivoting the view. And so we went with show settings. Well, we learned some things. We learned that the decoupling worked. Show filters is a better way of getting them to see the filter icon, but we still had some trouble with that toggle. So we tried some more testing with a single button that changed with an internal group. the filter icon was a hit, the button wasn't so much useful. So we went with yet another group or another round in our third group. And in this case, you know, we had individual labels for each action. And that actually was the best of all of these options. But I'd been part of a panel at Tableau-ish in a higher ed meetup, and one of the things I had talked about was, yeah, you know, we made the decision to hide the filters, but we could have gone for hiding the navigation. Well, why didn't we hide the navigation? And that's so we had this opportunity to test to see would that work, and so that's what we ended up doing. We moved the filters to always show, because one of the other things that we saw was people would get tired of having to click and hide and click and hide and click and hide. So that wasn't a good thing. It was they introduced some friction, even though they finally got it. But the other thing that we learned was, hey, this round of testing showed they get the top navigation without issue. So if we can show the filters and put the navigation in the top, that's awesome. And because it mimics things like they use on the web elsewhere. This is that same Jacob's Law thing that Hobbs talked about. You know, your users are using other websites 99% of the time. So if we can mimic something that they're used to, like this menu on the Best Buy website or in pretty much every other shopping app, why not try it in Tableau? So I'm not going to go through all of this. I did, after we decided we settled on that top nav, I did a lot of research into UI and UX conventions to see, okay, if we're going with this top nav, can we really do it? And there were some things that we were doing that were very much against convention. So things like having a tiny, tiny surface to click on to expand the menu, having what looks like a single button do both, you know, have two different actions. The little arrow expands and contracts, the button itself actually takes you to a different tab, and that can be confusing. So we did a whole series of card sorts. So, you know, we had people take all of the tab descriptions and group them into categories and tell us why they grouped them. We saw where did they group things similarly, because we weren't really sold on how that layout was. And what we ended up with was a single menu. You know, we have these panels with distinct color bars saying this is header, this is filters, this is footer, and then in the header we have a single menu option, a mega nav, where they get to see all the tabs, they get to see all the descriptions, and actually find the content that they're looking for instead of having to click around in 3 or 4 or 5 different menus. So that's all I got. I have a bunch of resources here. I'm gonna post them into the chat. But if we have time for questions, I'm willing to take them. But if we don't, feel free to email me.
I haven't seen any questions come through yet. We'll just wait 1 second. We can maybe do 1 or 2 questions.
Okay. And also, I saw the comment about Balsamic, and yes, Balsamic is amazing. It's really tough to show data in Balsamic. People like the standard charts that people or that are in there are not useful because they don't have real data. Even when you're showing a wireframe, people want to see your real data, but the rest of the whole wireframing aspect of it is amazing.
Okay. Oh, there we go.
So do we share the results of testing and improvements with the testers? We don't do like demos of all the changes that we've made, but we have had people come back in later rounds and be like, oh, hey, that's different. We are trying to use some of the results in making better decisions about how we build going forward as well. So in theory, they will see those changes in other dashboards as we update those as well, or as we build new dashboards.
Cool. All right. So next we're moving on. Last but not least, Layla.
Okay, thank you. Can you all see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, that's not working right. Okay. down. 1 second. Okay. That is not. Okay. Little technical difficulty, but thank you. Okay, so today like Brittany mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about filters and how you can find some alternatives to filters. But before we start on our banishing of any filters, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. So I work on the DataViz team at Visa, and we're kind of a tool agnostic team. And we help people across Visa with a variety of different tools that they use. And our work is kind of like in three major areas. One is we do kind of consulting projects on both internal and external facing dashboards or data products. And then we also do some work that's more focused on helping people to build out their data viz and communication and presentation skills. And then lastly, we also build some kind of reusable tools that help people along the various steps in the process of data viz. So in my personal time, I do occasionally like to viz. These are a few of my dashboards I've put on public. And sometimes I do get lucky and one of my cats agrees to help me out a little bit with my viz. So this is one time with one of our cats, Julius. Okay, today I'm just gonna kind of walk through a quick definition of how I like to think about interactive design, specifically the human-centered variety. Then I'm gonna do a demo. I'm gonna show a dashboard with some examples of alternatives to filters, alternative interactions. And then I'm gonna show you a tool we've recently launched at Visa that helps with evaluating data experiences from a human-centered perspective. And then I'll just explain kind of how to use it to iterate specifically on interactive design. So usually if you're anything like me, it goes something like this. You've created this beautiful, amazing dashboard. And now, of course, we need to add some interactive stuff to it. So the first thing that we usually think about is, of course, filters. And then if you're working within Tableau, you're probably also thinking about parameters, highlighters, which is a fairly newer feature, and of course, all the different varieties of dashboard and worksheet actions. But if you think about it, those are actually the surface level or the front end of interactions. They're really the Tableau features that we can use to provide users, our end users, interactive capabilities. So to really design interactions in a more human-centered way, we need to step back and think of interactions in terms of their function and purpose. And so that might be providing users the ability to search or to compare or even to identify outliers, among other things. And so then only after that, once we figure out that function, we can think about how to implement those functionalities with our Tableau features. So now onto some examples. For this demo, I am basically reimagining one of the more famous data visualizations, Hans Rosling's Gapminder. So if you've never seen his amazing videos, I encourage you to go to the Gapminder website and check those out. And they also have some exploratory tools there. So go over to our dashboard here. And this dashboard is available on my portfolio on my profile on Tableau Public. This first dashboard, first iteration, is an a pretty good dashboard to start with, but it's basically static dashboard, no interactions. And so here the scatter plot is really the star of this page. It shows the income per person along the x-axis, and then it shows the life expectancy along the y-axis. each of these circles represents a country in the world, and it's sized by the population of the country. So now it's time to, of course, add some filters. So first dashboard, first iteration here, we have, of course, added all of the potential possible filters, as often is the case. And I put in a pretty common panel on the right that's like a filter panel, and pretty much any dimension and measure that is in the chart or even just in the data set, threw it on there. So now let's take a look at the next iteration of taking just one of these filters. Let's take this country filter and see what alternative interactions we can come up with. So this dashboard has three that I came up with. So first we have this country highlighter over here. So I can just type in my country, because obviously that's usually what we like to do, and then see it highlighted over here in the main chart. The second interaction I have down here is a nice little bar chart, everyone's favorite chart. And you can click on any of these from the bar chart and see it highlighted in that main chart. And then another little feature I added here is the settings pane. So you can click on this, and now you have a few different options. So you can, by default, it's using life expectancy as the measure it's ranking by. We can also do income per person or population. And then we can, second option is we can adjust the total number of countries to display. And we could also choose, if in this case 10, if it's going to be the bottom 10 or the top 10. And then the third and final interaction is it's actually one of my favorite little tricks for interactions. And I guess you could call it on-demand labels, I guess. So any number, any mark or point on here in the chart, you can hover over and it'll just bring up the name of the country. And it's a great little alternative to having a tooltip that might hide the chart. So all three of those interactions, and including the filter actually, are enabling similar thing, which is enabling users to find a country in the scatter plot, but they're accomplishing it in very different ways. So first, the features of Tableau itself that it's using. So the highlighter is just out of the box highlighter that's super easy to just throw on there. Our second interaction is building a secondary chart, and then using that chart to trigger a dashboard highlight action. And then there's also some parameters involved here that are providing the users with some additional flexibility on kind of like customizing their analysis. And then the third, those labels are they're also using a dashboard highlight action, but they're actually, it's just combining it with labels on the worksheet itself and setting the option there to only display when highlighted. And then the three interactions are also a bit different in terms of the type of task that they're supporting. So the first one, the country highlighter, is really for when users already know what specific country they're looking for. In the information architecture world, it would be called, it's like your classic known search task. So it's obviously more of a specific use case. It's probably pretty common that you would want to look up your own country or maybe some other country that you know someone in. And then the other two actually are kind of answering a slightly different question. So in that case, it's more for helping users to identify some interesting country to explore further. So the chart, the top bottom list, provides a more guided analysis. So we're using the chart to kind of search for countries that fit some sort of pattern. So in this case, it's the countries with the highest income per person. And then you're using that chart to then find those specific countries in the chart, in the main chart. And then for the last one, the labels, that's really, of all the searches, that's the most visual search. So you're really using the chart itself to look for a country that looks interesting, and then hovering over that to identify it. So based on just those three items, we definitely have a lot of alternatives to filters. So how do we know which one is best? Or how do we kind of choose among them instead of just going with our maybe first instincts and throwing out everything on there that's possible? So I really feel like that's where following a more user-centered process is helpful. So it really all depends on the audience and really thinking about the tasks that we want to enable them to do. Now, sometimes it is nice, like in the last talk, to be able to obviously do research with the primary end users, but a lot of the stuff can really, we can kind of learn to think about the data experiences we're building with a more human-centered kind of lens. So we need to think about the function of the interactions, like I talked about earlier, but also try to kind of like imagine what the whole experience of using this dashboard would be for our users. So we recently developed a tool at Visa that can help with kind of prompting you to looking at your data experiences with a more human-centered focus. And I am very excited to be able to share that with you today. So let's take a look at that real quick. Okay. So it's basically a critique framework that's specific to data visualizations and data experiences. And we created it so that we could have a more consistent method of going about evaluating data visualizations, but also a common language for everyone across Visa, from like stakeholders to people who are designing and building visualizations, to be able to talk about our data products in a similar way. So it's got basically three components. The first is the data experience design pillars. The second is the DX heuristics. And then the third are critique one-pagers for each of the pillars. So the pillars themselves, I have them listed over here. Basically they focus on, they're kind of like the designer's perspective. So they focus on design activities and choices that we make. So you can see the 6 listed here, and then in this column, you can kind of see what are some of those actual choices or kind of outputs or elements that we work with and for that pillar. So we always start out with purpose, and this one happens before, hopefully, you do any visiting. And that really includes the, key questions that they're asking in the audience and that sort of thing. Then we move on to information architecture, which is really the thinking about how the steps the user takes to answer that question, but also really the structural elements of your design. And then the data representation is really what most people that come to us looking, for feedback usually are expecting to get feedback on. It's actual charts and encodings. Visual hierarchy is the kind of very front and top layer of visual design. Interactivity, which is what we'll be talking about today, And then context is the kind of a lot of the things that give you that, hopefully that delightful aspect of the experience. And so then the next component is the heuristics. And a lot of these, we actually were very inspired and like based it on the usability heuristics that are already out there. And some of the sources we used are listed over here. But basically they are more focused on the experience from the user's perspective. So we started with some of the more common ones that are used in the UX world in usability evaluations. And then we kind of expanded those to consider some of the more unique aspects of data visualization. And so what we ended up with is 16 heuristics, and we grouped those into 5 broad categories. So I like to think of the categories as kind of outcomes for the user. So for example, when a data experience is findable, it means that users can easily find their way as well as locate and discover information and functionality. A learnable experience means that users can easily learn how to use the system and how to interpret information. A focused and clear experience means that users can focus on what's most important and most meaningful to their analysis. And a trusted experience means users can trust the data and their interactions within the system. And finally, valuable is the component that enables users to answer key business questions and complete the analytical task. So if you look at something like the let's say the focused and clear category, the actual heuristics under that are, some of them are taken from the usability world, and some are kind of unique, but they are, flexibility, productivity, that's kind of like the efficiency that a lot of times we talk about when we provide feedback. And then it's also directing attention and limiting distraction. So all of those together kind of feed into and make up the focus and clear facet. So then the last component of the framework is the critique one-pagers. And that's where the pillars and heuristics going to come together. So I'm going to show you the first one, which is purpose. But basically each of the pillars has its own one-pager, and it's got, in theory, everything you need to, just on one page, to critique a viz for that pillar. So the purpose, I'm going to focus on the interactivity pillar, but the focus pillar, I'm going to show you real quick, just because it is quite a bit different than the other pillars. And also it is really foundational for all of the other pillars. So this is where we define kind of what we want to achieve with the visualization, but try to make it or phrase it from the user's perspective. So we do look at these are some of the elements we look at and try to define. But ultimately, it's really about getting to be able to define that key question that we want to enable users to answer with our data product. Although I will say in some situations, it does make more sense to define it as a task. So then the reason why this part is so foundational is because we need this definition of purpose, and especially that key question, to critique the rest of the pillars. So when we're looking at the rest of the pillars, we're really asking, how well do the elements of the design for each of those pillars support that purpose, or enable users to answer that key question? And then having that key question also helps us to identify some of the follow-up questions or tasks. So here we're going to ask ourselves, so we know they want to answer this big question. What information would help them to answer that? Or like what other information, what questions do they have next? And then also, I think just as important is what information would not really be useful. And that's when we can really weed out a lot of the clutter in information. And so This is another little tool we developed. We call it the Viz Canvas. And it's really where we use that to kind of capture all of those definitions so we can have it easy to reference when we're looking at the other pillars. So if we think back to that demo dashboard, so for the country filter that I replaced, and then those 3 interactions, the main function was to enable users to locate a specific country that they're interested in looking at further. So in this case, the key question might be, how is country XYZ, in our case, United States, performing, right? Or maybe even better to be more specific, what's the income and life expectancy in country X, and is this good or bad? But the problem with that is that ultimately those are just numbers. So to better understand how good or bad those numbers are for that country, our users would probably want to compare the country's performance to other countries. So some follow-up questions there might be, how does the country rank compared to other countries in the world? Or maybe just to countries in that same region, or to countries with similar income or maybe similar life expectancy. So now we have some more focused questions. We can jump ahead and look at the interactivity pillar. So this gives you a bit more of an idea of what the critique one-pagers look like. So they all, other than purpose, have these 2 main sections. So you have your study section and your evaluate section. So the study question starts out with just a list of kind of things, almost like prerequisites, things you need to have in hand, in addition to the actual visualization, to be able to critique that the viz for this pillar. And then below that, we have kind of questions and activities that help us to really closely review that the data viz, and in this case, review the interactions or the interactivity layer for the viz, so that we really understand how users would see and understand the available interactions with the current design. So then after we understand the current design, we can move on to the evaluate section, where we analyze and try to identify the strengths and weaknesses of that design. So this second part, I guess, is the more judgmental, but it's really where you're digging in deeper and like finding, hopefully, strength, what's working and what's not, but also what are some areas we can focus on to improve it. So the core section most of the content in this section is what I'd say we're affectionately calling critiqual questions. So that's these questions right here. And so if you read some of these, you'll notice that they are they're really open-ended prompts that guide you through considering all the different aspects of, in this case, interaction design. And then each question is also categorized with the most applicable heuristic, and we have those heuristics listed over here. And then those heuristics for the question should help us to guide our design choices, so that we kind of like, we can evaluate maybe some different choices, but really stay focused in our, how we judge strengths and weaknesses based on how the choices will impact those facets of the experience. So for example, one of the questions that I personally really like here is this one. How might interactive features be used to enable searching for specific data patterns or relationships? Data points, patterns, or relationships. So this question prompts you to think about something that's obviously a very important aspect of the interactivity layer. It's one of the key kind of functions of interactive features to let people search and locate information. But it's broad enough, it's phrased broadly enough so that the solutions could really be limitless. I showed you 3 solutions earlier, but you could just as easily come up with a ton of different options. And then the heuristics for this question should then help you to evaluate and choose among those options which solution might work better. So for this question, the 3 heuristics are locate, direct attention, and productivity. And locate is part of findability, and the other 2 are part of focused and clear. So if we're evaluating those 3 interactive features we came up with earlier, in terms of specifically how effective they are at enabling search, we should then, this helps us to start thinking about it in terms of how they're going to impact our users' ability to locate a country of interest. Then looking at productivity, we can consider how each of these interactions might improve the user's efficiency or not improve in completing that search task. And then the direct attention is really a little bit more of a visual component, but it just helps us keep in mind how visual cues, like in our examples, highlighting, might help users to both notice and to focus on the results of their search. So if you look at some of the other questions on this pillar, there are a few that relate to findability. I have them highlighted here. And this is in terms of the interactivity layer. It's about helping users to search and locate information. So our interactions, helping users or supporting users in that. And then how easy is it to discover those available interactions? And for this pillar, there are a lot of questions about learnability. I think interactions can really help a lot with learnability. So it's really focused on making it easier for users to learn how to use interactive features, but also our interactive features helping users to understand how to read and understand the display itself. And then there are other questions that that are more focused on the focused and clear category. And I think that's the focus and clear category. I think that's where a lot of the power comes in with interactions. So you can, if you think about it, you can really do a lot with interactions in terms of limiting distraction and supporting flexibility and productivity. And then there are a few trusted related questions. And this is, I think with this pillar in particular, it's more focused on the heuristics of predictability. So is it going to work like I think it's going to work? And then error prevention and recovery, reducing as much as possible the potential for users to make mistakes. But if they do, that our users are going to be comfortable that it's going to not be that difficult to backtrack and get over those mistakes. And then the last one is valuable. There are a few questions on the valuable heuristic here, and that's really where it ties back to the purpose. So these questions are really focused on kind of how well the current interactions support users in answering their key questions. So I'm going to try to wrap this up as quickly as possible. Just going back to our workbook, I'm just going to show you real quick how we might go about iterating on this version using the critical questions. So, so now our goal is to iterate based on how can we better support that purpose that we defined earlier. So if you remember, that was basically two things. It was enabling users to first find a specific country, and then being able to compare that selected country to other countries. So this is what I came up with. You can see I kept the highlight country name, so you can still type in a country to find it. And then I also added a highlight region. So for example, you can see the context of all the countries in a region. And then I did still keep the on-demand labels. So users can, so basically, if you think about how have we addressed or supported that first part of our purpose, the finding a country, users still have the flexibility to either find a specific country or can look around at the chart and find one that they think is interesting. And one thing I added is these marginal strip plots. And these show the distribution for each of the axes. So we have the income per person here, and then the life expectancy there. And so you can basically hover and see how each country compares to the others, let's say life expectancy. So this is kind of taking some of the information that was in the bar chart earlier, but making it really easy to see the full picture of how every country in this view is ranked. And then you can also see, it is an interesting one. Maybe this one. You can also click on one of these and that engages interaction, which you can also get by clicking any point on the main chart itself. So you'll see that brings up basically a few other new things. So one is the reference line, which if nothing is selected, it just shows the average for each of the measures, the X and Y axes. And then when you click on a country, it updates to show the value for the reference line for the selected country. Then there is also a little pointer here with the label that points to, so that the country is highlighted in each of the strip plots, and then the pointer kind of points to that same mark, and there is a label with a specific value for that country. And then there's another little thing, which I guess I would describe as a dynamic axis caption. So when nothing is selected, this just gives a little help with understanding how to interpret the axes. When you click something, one of the countries, it updates with kind of a bar chart and the specific count of all the countries that scored below the selected country. So that is an example. I think one of my favorite questions from the critique framework for this pillar is how might interactive features be used to provide flexible and data-driven ways to zoom in and out of different levels of detail. So point being, that doesn't necessarily have to be your typical drill through. It could just as easily be something like this, that's really providing a higher level summary of what you're seeing in the view, and you have the added benefit of not having to move back and forth to different pages. You're staying in the context of your analysis. So I was going to talk a little bit more about how the questions relate to the kind of choices that I made around the interactions, but I want to be sensitive to your all's time. I think one of the main things real quick is I do love a good highlight action, as you can maybe imagine from these iterations of this dashboard. But a lot of times it's a little too light to notice. And in this particular case, because the strips in the strip plot are so thin, it's just a less geometric area, so it's going to be harder to notice anyways. So that is why I added this little pointer here to really be able to direct attention there to let users kind of notice more what it is that the action they just took actually impacted on the view. And then I think also between the pointer and the label, it really does a good job of like connecting all the different elements on this page. So it kind of like helps users to learn how to read the whole display, the display as a whole. But they're learning that by actually interacting with the data viz. So if you count really, really carefully on this last iteration, the grand total number of filters is 0. And of course, that does give me some personal satisfaction because of the title of this talk, obviously. But I will backpedal a little and say that even though I did start talking about setting fires to all your filters, I totally get, and I'm not saying that you don't actually have to always get rid of every single one of your filters. But I do hope that I've convinced you today to think more broadly and creatively about the different types of Tableau features you can use to add interactivity. It doesn't also have to be the out-of-the-box ones or quick filters. But even more importantly, to always think about the function that you want to provide with those interactions before starting to think about how you're actually going to make it happen, whether it's in Tableau or in any other tool. But most of all, I hope it encouraged you to examine and re-examine all of your choices with a critical eye. Thank you.
Awesome. We did have a question come through from Caesar. He said, are selections or actions easy to reverse? I'm not sure if he needs to clarify on that more or not.
Sorry, that was me just quoting what was actually written in the text. That was great. I love seeing that just because it gives, it's just so thoughtful and so well really planned, where usually those are afterthoughts. Usually you go through, you deliver something, and when the client looks at it, they're like, oh, you know what, it doesn't reverse back. It's me pointing out more of a wonderful.
I know one of the things we considered, look, one of the very tactile things with interactions is you want to make sure that the surface you're providing is big enough so people don't make those mistakes, right? So like small thin lines are harder to interact with. So in those situations, you can think about like, do we want to maybe provide some alternate way that people can select something? So we thought about putting that in there, but that's kind of an example of where like we really try to make those questions broad enough that you might consider those things anyways when you're thinking about like, is something easy to reverse, if that makes sense.
Cool. And then I asked, and I know a couple other people interested in this, is that document public?
Oh, yes. So the dashboard is on Tableau Public. The presentation I can share. The document is going to be public, but we're just in the process of trying to figure out the best place, like the best way to be able to share that digitally. So the answer is like stay.
It will be.
So
Okay,
I don't know,
cool.
Brittany, if the best, we can just like reach out to you whenever we have like.
Yeah, definitely. And then I can just send it out to our group.
Okay, perfect.
Any other questions before I wrap it up? All right, so if anything comes through, oh, there's one more. So I believe Layla's contact information is on the event page. So you should be able to get it there. If you can't find it there, let me know. I have lots of contact information for her.
Yeah.
All right. So this is actually going to be our last meeting for the year. But as I stated earlier, there's plenty of other virtual content out there if you're still looking for more. And then you can always find more information about the group at dctug.com, or you can go to our user group page or follow us on Twitter. And if you're interested in presenting next year, maybe eventually hosting or sponsoring, but mainly presenting. So give me an email, and thanks for coming. I hope everybody has a great rest of the year.